You're thinking about owning a data center. From the outside, it can look like one of the cleanest infrastructure businesses imaginable. Build a secure facility, fill it with computing equipment, sign long-term customers, and collect recurring revenue. But the building is not the heart of the business, and the servers are not the hardest part. The economics are dominated by power availability, electrical infrastructure, cooling, financing, reliability, and how much capacity is actually leased. This breakdown will show what a data center owner is really buying, where the capital goes, how the property earns money, and why a facility that looks technically impressive can still produce disappointing cash flow. Start with the resource that determines almost everything else: electricity. A large data center is closer to a power-intensive industrial facility than a conventional warehouse. It receives high-voltage electricity, conditions and distributes that power through multiple layers of electrical equipment, delivers it to customer hardware, and then spends more energy removing the heat created by that hardware. The process runs continuously. If the power disappears, even briefly, customers may lose access to critical systems. So an owner is not simply leasing rooms for computers. The owner is selling access to reliable power, cooling, connectivity, physical security, and operational continuity. LBNL notes that nearly all electricity consumed by computing equipment ultimately becomes heat, making thermal management integral to facility economics. That changes the order in which a project should be evaluated. Many commercial properties begin with land, zoning, traffic, and building design. A data center often begins with a much harder question. How much dependable power can this site receive, and when? A parcel can be inexpensive, flat, and perfectly zoned, yet still be a poor data center site if the local grid cannot support the planned load. Power constraints can require new substations, transmission upgrades, transformers, utility studies, and years of coordination. In major U.S. markets, those constraints now shape development schedules as much as construction itself. PJM says major transmission solutions supporting growing load, including Northern Virginia data center demand, can require more than 5 years to develop. That is why power-ready land can command a premium. Developers increasingly value sites that already have a credible path to large electrical capacity. Even when a nearby parcel looks cheaper on a price-breaker basis, cheap land can become expensive if the owner must fund major utility extensions, new fiber routes, road improvements, water infrastructure, or other site work before a single customer can use the facility. In this business, the cheapest acre is not necessarily the cheapest project. CBRE's North American research similarly finds that sites offering relatively near-term power access are highly sought after. This channel is about exactly that kind of ownership math, not headline revenue, but the capital operating costs, contracts, and risks underneath the asset. And with data centers, the first lesson is that location is really a bundle of infrastructure decisions. You need electricity at the right scale, multiple fiber routes, acceptable permitting, access to skilled labor, tax treatment that does not destroy the equipment budget, and a utility environment capable of supporting future expansion. Northern Virginia remains the largest data center market in North America, but its scale also illustrates the problem. Heavy concentration of data center load has forced major transmission planning and power upgrades, and developers increasingly look toward adjacent or secondary markets when capacity is easier to secure. The same pattern appears elsewhere. Demand may favor established hubs, while power availability pushes new development outward. A strong site is therefore not simply close to customers. It is close to the infrastructure that allows customers to operate continuously. CBRE reported more than 4,000 megawatts of Northern Virginia inventory at the end of 2025, while also identifying power procurement and permitting as major constraints across North America. Taxes can also change project economics. Some states provide targeted exemptions or incentives for qualifying data center equipment, and Virginia has historically offered a sales and dues tax exemption for qualifying data center purchases subject to investment, job, and program requirements. But incentives are conditional. Laws can change, and a tax benefit should never rescue an otherwise weak site. The correct way to think about incentives is as one variable in a much larger equation that also includes electricity price, utility timing, property cost, fiber access, labor, insurance, local regulation, and future expansion capacity. Virginia's rules themselves demonstrate why current law must be checked, rather than assuming an old incentive remains unchanged. Now consider the building itself. A normal warehouse is dominated by the shell, slab, structure, roof, loading areas, and basic building systems. A data center is different because enormous amounts of capital sit behind the walls. Electrical distribution, switchgear, transformers, uninterruptible power systems, backup generation, cooling plants, pumps, piping, controls, security, fire protection, and network pathways can outweigh the importance of the basic shell. The building may look simple from the road, but the expensive part is the infrastructure that makes every rack usable. The electrical chain begins before power reaches the server floor. Utility power may arrive at high voltage and pass through substations and transformers before switchgear distributes it across the facility. Uninterruptible power systems bridge short interruptions while generators or other backup resources become available. Redundant paths may allow equipment to be maintained without taking customer loads offline. Every additional layer of resilience costs money, occupies space, requires maintenance, and introduces equipment that eventually needs replacement. Cooling creates another major capital requirement. Almost all of the electricity consumed by computing equipment ultimately becomes heat. Traditional facilities have relied heavily on air cooling. But higher density computing has accelerated the adoption of liquid cooling designs and more sophisticated thermal systems. This is especially important for AI workloads, where the amount of power concentrated into a small physical area can be dramatically higher than in older enterprise environments. Higher density can increase revenue potential per unit of floor area, but it can also require different piping, heat rejection, structural capacity, controls, and maintenance skills. Microsoft, for example, reported in 2025 that all of its Azure regions could support liquid cooling as it expanded. AI infrastructure. Then there is connectivity. A data center customer is not paying only for electricity. It also needs reliable network access. Serious facilities try to avoid a single physical route that can be severed by one construction accident. That means multiple carrier options, diverse fiber entrances, protected pathways, cross-connect infrastructure, and careful coordination with telecommunications providers. A site with abundant power but weak connectivity may still struggle to attract the customers it was designed to serve. Security and fire protection add more layers. Depending on the operating model and customer requirements, a facility may use controlled access, surveillance, compartmentalization, specialized fire detection and suppression, perimeter security, and strict visitor procedures. These are not decorative upgrades. They are part of the service customers are buying. The owner is promising that valuable computing equipment will remain powered, cooled, connected, physically protected, and accessible under defined operating conditions. All of that must be financed before the property reaches stable occupancy. This is where the difference between development cost and business risk becomes important. Construction may require an enormous upfront investment, but the owner's real exposure continues after opening. Interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance contracts, staffing, security, and portions of the electrical and cooling overhead continue whether the building is full, half-leased, or largely empty. A technically completed facility is not the same thing as an economically successful facility. Working capital matters too. Even after construction is complete, the owner needs liquidity for payroll, utility deposits, fuel, repairs, spare parts, customer installations, insurance, and timing gaps between expenses and collections. A project can be fully financed for construction and still become stressed if the operating reserve is too thin during lease-up or an unexpected equipment failure. The revenue side usually takes several forms. Retail colocation divides capacity among many smaller customers. A customer may lease a cabinet cage or modest power allocation, while the operator provides electricity, cooling, security, connectivity options, and support. Retail colocation can produce attractive pricing per unit of capacity, but it also creates a more complicated commercial operation. More customers mean more sales activity, billing relationships, service requests, contract renewals, account management, and churn. Wholesale colocation and hyperscale leasing operate differently. Instead of hundreds of small customers, The owner may lease large blocks of capacity to cloud platforms, technology companies, AI operators, or other major users. The price per kilowatt may be lower than in a smaller retail arrangement, but a large contract can stabilize occupancy and make future cash flow more visible. That visibility matters not only for operations, but also for financing. Lenders generally prefer an asset with strong contracted revenue and creditworthy tenants over one that depends on rapidly filling empty capacity after construction. Current market pricing also shows how scarce powered capacity has become. CBRE reported that average asking rates for 250 to 500 kilowatt requirements across major North American markets reached about $196 per kilowatt per month at the end of 2025, while very large requirements experienced even sharper pricing pressure in some markets. That figure is not a universal lease rate for every facility or every customer, but it demonstrates that power, availability, and modern high-density capacity now influence pricing directly. Large tenants create a different risk: concentration. Suppose one customer leases almost the entire facility for a long term. The building can look fantastic on a lender presentation because occupancy is high and cash flow is predictable. But if that customer eventually downsizes, changes architecture, moves workloads, or refuses to renew, the owner may suddenly face a large vacancy at exactly the wrong time. A facility designed around one tenant's power density cooling approach or network configuration may require substantial capital before another customer can use it efficiently. A diversified customer base reduces the damage caused by one departure. But diversification is not free. It requires more sales coverage, more contracts, more billing, more service complexity, and usually more turnover. Many operators, therefore, try to balance large anchor customers with smaller tenants. The anchor capacity supports stability. The smaller customers can support pricing, service revenue, and diversification. The exact mix depends on the operator's platform, market, and capital structure. Now we reach the operating expense that can overpower almost every other line item: electricity. A data center's electric bill is not simply a fixed utility expense. It depends on customer IT load, cooling demand, electrical losses, facility design, climate, operating practices, and utility pricing. Because power consumption is so large, small changes in efficiency can translate into millions of dollars at scale. The standard efficiency metric is power usage effectiveness, or PUE. It compares total facility energy use with the energy consumed by IT equipment. A PUE of 1.0 would mean every unit of facility electricity goes directly to IT hardware, with nothing required for cooling, power conversion, lighting, or other support systems. Real facilities operate above 1.0. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory reported an industry average around 1.44 2023, while highly optimized, newer facilities can perform better. Here is a simplified ownership example. Maya is evaluating a 30-megawatt IT facility. To isolate the effect of efficiency, assume the IT equipment runs continuously and electricity costs 8 cents per kilowatt. At a PUE of 1.4, the total facility load would be 42 megawatts, meaning 12 megawatts are supporting the IT load rather than powering it directly. That overhead would cost roughly $8.4 million a year under those assumptions. If improvements reduced PUE to 1.2, total load would fall to 36 megawatts and overhead would fall to 6 megawatts, cutting that modeled overhead cost by about $4.2 million annually. That is not a forecast for Maya's real facility, because power prices, utilization, whether load profile, demand charges, and operating conditions vary. It is simply a demonstration of why efficiency deserves executive attention. A better cooling design, more efficient power conversion, improved airflow, or better operating control can materially change cash flow when multiplied across tens of megawatts. AI makes this equation more demanding. Higher density accelerators can concentrate far more power and heat into each rack than traditional enterprise hardware. The industry response includes direct-to-chip liquid cooling, different heat exchange systems, higher capacity, electrical distribution, stronger structural design, and more attention to water and heat rejection. These changes can support valuable high-density customers, but they also increase technical complexity and can make a facility more specialized. LBNL's 2026 work identifies rising AI power density and advanced cooling as major drivers of changing data center thermal design. Specialization creates technology risk. A building designed around today's hardware may not be perfectly matched to what customers want several years from now. Cooling interfaces can change. Rack densities can rise. Power architecture can evolve. Network patterns can shift. An owner who spends heavily to optimize for one generation of equipment is making a capital allocation decision about future demand, not merely installing better plumbing. The higher rent available from advanced capacity must be weighed against additional construction cost, maintenance complexity, and the risk of future retrofit. Reliability has similar economics. The Uptime Institute's tier system runs from Tier I through Tier 4, but the categories should not be reduced to no backup versus perfect backup. Tier I already includes basic dedicated infrastructure, such as UPS capacity, cooling, and an engine generator. Tier 3 is designed around concurrent maintainability, while Tier 4 adds fault-tolerant characteristics. Higher resilience can support customers with more demanding uptime requirements, but the owner pays for additional equipment, paths, controls, maintenance, and space. The important business question is not whether the highest technical specification sounds impressive. It is whether customers will pay enough for it. Overbuilding can be as damaging as underbuilding. If a market mostly accepts a well-designed Tier 3 type environment, spending far more to chase a level of redundancy that tenants do not value can trap capital inside equipment that does not produce proportional revenue. Reliability should be matched to customer demand and contract requirements, not to the owner's desire for the most expensive badge. Utilization ties all of these decisions together. A data center with strong power, cooling, fiber, and security still needs paying customers. Fixed costs continue while capacity sits unused. That means lease-up timing can matter as much as construction budget. A project that opens 6 months late with much of the building pre-leased may be financially healthier than a technically perfect project that opens on time with large blocks of speculative capacity and no committed tenants. This is also why pre-leasing has become so important. CBRE's recent market research shows extraordinarily tight vacancy in major North American markets and extensive leasing of projects before completion. Scarcity favors operators who already control power and can deliver capacity on a credible schedule. But it also raises the stakes for developers. Signing a customer before construction is finished creates valuable revenue visibility. Yet it can create contractual pressure if transformers, switchgear, generators, cooling equipment, permitting, or utility work arrive later than expected. Equipment lead times are not theoretical. The U.S. Department of Energy has documented persistent transformer supply constraints, with distribution transformer lead times stretching far beyond pre-pandemic norms and large substation transformers sometimes requiring years. An owner, therefore, has to manage the construction schedule as a supply chain problem, not just a building problem. A delayed transformer can postpone revenue from an otherwise completed facility. DOE reported in 2026 that some large substation transformers and generators had lead times extending to 3 or even 4 years. The same logic applies to the GRI-DUS. Electricity demand is now growing after a long period of relative stagnation, and data centers are a major driver. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory's 2026 update estimates that data centers could account for roughly 9.5% to 15.3% of total U.S. electricity use by 2030, depending on the scenario. That wide range is itself important. Nobody knows exactly how quickly AI demand, hardware efficiency, construction, grid expansion, and customer behavior will evolve. Demand today is undeniably strong. CBRE reported record North American absorption in 2025 and extremely low vacancy across primary markets. Microsoft said it added more than 2 gigawatts of data center capacity during its fiscal 2025 and had previously announced plans for approximately $80 billion of AI-enabled data center investment for that fiscal year. Those numbers explain why developers are competing so aggressively for land, equipment, contractors, and power. But strong industry demand does not eliminate project-level risk. A new site can still fail if its utility schedule slips. If construction overruns the budget, if financing becomes more expensive, if the tenant mix is weak, if a major customer or if the operator builds a technical specification the local market will not pay for. The sector can be booming while an individual facility underperforms. Secondary markets illustrate the trade-off. Moving away from a crowded hub may provide cheaper land and faster access to power. But the operator must still test fiber, diversity, latency, customer depth, labor, tax policy, permitting, and resale liquidity. A site can solve the power problem and create a demand problem. It can also solve the land cost problem and create an infrastructure cost problem. Every apparent bargain needs to be evaluated as a complete system. Financing magnifies those trade-offs. Data centers are capital-intensive, long-lived assets, so the cost of debt affects returns for years. Strong leases can improve lender confidence, but debt service does not disappear when occupancy falls. Owners also need reserves for maintenance and future capital replacement because batteries, generators, cooling equipment, controls, and electrical components do not last forever. Cash flow available to the owner is what remains after operating costs, debt obligations, capital needs, and other required expenses. Not the revenue number at the top of the statement. That distinction is especially important when people describe data centers as passive infrastructure. They can have long leases and recurring revenue, but the underlying operation is active. Teams monitor power, cooling, alarms, security, maintenance, network pathways, customer installations, capacity planning, and emergency procedures. The owner may employ specialists directly or contract portions of the work, but somebody must manage the risk every hour of the year. The strongest operators, therefore, tend to think in layers. First, secure a site with credible power and connectivity. Second, design the facility around customer requirements rather than technical vanity. Third, control construction and equipment procurement. Fourth, sign enough contracted demand to support the capital structure. Fifth, operate efficiently enough that utility and maintenance costs do not consume the economics. And finally, preserve flexibility so the facility can adapt when hardware, cooling, and customer requirements change. So, what are you really buying when you own a data center? Not a warehouse full of computers. You are buying control over a scarce combination of power, land, connectivity, cooling capacity, reliability, and long-term customer commitments. The concrete shell matters, but it is the least interesting part of the financial story. The industry's current expansion makes that point clearer than ever. Power availability is limiting development in established markets. Transformer and grid equipment remain constrained. AI workloads are raising density and cooling requirements. Customers are pre-leasing capacity earlier, and the U.S. power system is being asked to support a level of data center growth that was difficult to imagine only a few years ago. For an owner, that creates both opportunity and danger. If you secure power early, build the right specification, control your capital costs, lease the capacity to strong customers, and operate efficiently. The asset can produce durable contracted cash flow. If one of those links fails, the same facility can become an expensive collection of equipment, carrying debt and maintenance costs while waiting for revenue. That is the economics of the business. The scarce resource is not floor area, it is dependable, deliverable infrastructure. In the AI era, the operators with the best economics may not be the ones with the biggest buildings. They may be the ones who can prove that the megawatts, cooling network capacity, and contractual revenue will still be there when the customer needs them.